Hello and welcome to Channel 6 News at 9. My name is Matt Schaefer, and today we're discussing Native American mascots in our nation and our school. Here's Andrew Ciatto for more information.
Thanks, Matt. A new controversy has consumed American sports, this one regarding Native American-themed mascots. It has been brought to the attention of sports franchises that some people are displeased and do not approve of team names or mascots that pertain to Native American culture. The argument has been made that these mascots show the hypocritical nature that Native Americans were forced out of their land first, and now we, as Americans, wish to accept them into our new society. This argument was heard by the NCAA, and they passed new legislation for their football teams. In 2005, the NCAA perceived 19 team names to be hostile towards Native Americans. The teams had two choices. One was to ask tribal leaders for permission to keep their name, and two was to simply keep it, but be banned from hosting championship games. In our Radnor School District, the board is holding an ongoing discussion to determine if and how we should change our school logo. Thus far, we have officially erased the term Red from our name, the Radnor Raiders. With more on the story, here's Matt.
Spot on, Andrew. We also do not have the Native American mascot running along the sideline during games. However, it is under discussion if keeping the name Raider should even be allowed. Our school is stuck in a state of uncertainty because we are unsure if our logo is the Raider, the letter R, or if it needs to be changed altogether. To help us find our identity, we proceeded down the winding halls of Radnor.
Our first interviewee was Mrs. Wetzel, our librarian at Radnor High School, and we asked her right away if she thought Native American-themed mascots and logos were offensive.
Yes, we did.
And this is what she said.
I mean, I think it's an interesting question because it definitely appears in so many different sports logos and mascots, but I never really thought about it until you actually brought it up. You know, it's one of those things that we're so used to seeing, and, you know, it just becomes something that we don't really think about. So I think it's a good conversation to start because I think it could be offensive depending on, obviously, what that culture or group, what their opinion is of it.
We then told Mrs. Wetzel that there's an interesting conversation going on in our school with Mr. Skellinger, the teachers, and the students that we're trying to decide if the term Raider is positive or negative and if we should keep that as our mascot. So we asked her opinion on that topic.
I think I'd actually put it up to the students and have sort of a contest for a new logo or mascot if that's what it's going to boil down to. I think that the students should really have a say and, you know, express their creativity and school spirit that way. You have a vote.
After we asked Mrs. Wetzel her opinion, we asked her if she thought the mascot would change at Radnor, and if so, how long would it take to change?
Just the fact that it's probably in question now, I would say it probably will eventually change. I don't know how long it's been the mascot, if it's been since the school's been around, but I mean, I think it would probably be at least a year-long process to debate and discuss and decide on a final resolution.
All right, so Mrs. Wetzel, our librarian, thinks that is a good point that us, not being part of the Native American culture, do not think of it as offensive or weird that we use Native Americans in our logos and team names. But Native Americans may find it offensive, and if they do, there should be something done about it. She also thinks if there is something done about it, it should be in the hands of the students, that there should be a vote. This is because the students are the ones that would be taking offense in school, so they should have the say on what happens to resolve the issue. Lastly, she thinks that it would take about 1 year to change, since it's already in question now. Next up, we interview Mrs. Williams, another Western civilization teacher.
And there was a student in her class by the name of Lewis that had a very interesting point on why the stay as Radnor's mascot.
Yes, his name is Lewis, and he's in my American Studies class. His point of view was pretty controversial in class. In fact, it led to continued heated debate for many days. His point is that history is history. It's in the past. It is part of our sort of historical quilt, if you will, but that's where it should stay. And then this issue is sort of revisionist history, where we're trying to look back at the past and sort of adopt present features of who we are as Americans to make up for past actions that we had nothing to do with.
After Mrs. Williams told us about Lewis's argument, we asked her if she thought Radnor would hear this argument out and keep the Raider as our mascot.
What I expect is, as an educational institution, is that we wrestle with the hard questions, that we at least ask, that we consider it, that we engage students and all stakeholders in the community, parents, Native Americans, scholars who have some expertise on the issue. Perhaps we look at major league sporting teams who have fought over these issues in court, and perhaps we learn some lessons.
Simply put, Lewis thinks that the past is the past and that we should not try to change what we're doing today in order to make up for what we did in the past. Mrs. Williams thinks that this subject should be discussed among the many people of our society, and we should learn lessons from major league teams that have already went through cases on this issue.
Here we asked our principal, Mr. Skellinger, about the Native American mascot situation, except in our hometown of Radnor.
The mascot itself, the caricature of a Native American in a headdress on it, that's gone. We put that away about 4 years ago, and as long as I'm here, that won't return. So I am against the mascot, but I would like us to be able to maintain the name without the red, just the Radnor Raiders. We've had that name for over 100 years, and I think that can sort of morph into a more generic, less ethnically sensitive nickname.
Rather than asking Mr. Skellinger his opinion on if and when our mascot would change, we asked him if financial reasons should account for any consideration in changing mascots and logos.
I do know that the NCAA did require some schools to make the change, and I will tell you there's a difference in my mind between Redskins and Braves or Raiders. I mean, Redskins, there is no other interpretation. That is talking about skin pigmentation. That's offensive. And I'm an Eagles fan, but that's different. I'd hate to see financial considerations weigh in at all.
After getting rid of the Native American headdress in the term red in front of Raiders, Mr. Skellinger thinks that we should be able to keep the term Raiders as long as it is not offensive to any Native American populations around. He also thinks that financial considerations should not come into play in this situation. Lastly, he thinks that there are many team names much worse than Raiders, such as Redskins, that are much more offensive than team names such as Raiders and Braves.
Next we asked Ahmad Khan, a senior here at Radnor, why he says that the Radnor Raider mascot should stay.
Yeah, I think it's like an important part of like Radnor tradition, and I know a lot of people say it's like offensive to Native Americans, but I don't think that's an applicable argument nowadays, considering that Native American culture is pretty much, it's non-existent in this part of the U.S.
And with more on why the Native American mascot's not offensive, Ahmad proceeded to say,
Yeah, I think it's representative of many athletic qualities. That's why a lot of schools across the U.S. use the Raider. We're clearly not the only one, and for a good reason.
Ahmad thinks that we should keep our name and mascot because offense is not applicable due to the very low amount of Native American population in this area. He also said that it is already tradition, so changing it would interrupt that tradition. He also brought up the good point that the Raiders now represent good athletic qualities like pride, courage, and honor. Today we heard good points on both sides of the argument. Mrs. Wetzel brought up the point that maybe the students could have a vote since it is most applicable to them. Mrs. Williams' student Lewis also brought up a good point that the past is the past and we shouldn't change what we're doing now in order to make up for what we did in the past.
And Mr. Skellinger said we were already making efforts, such as getting rid of the name Red in Raiders and the mascot up and down the sidelines, but that we should be able to stick with the term Raider as long as it's accepted. Ahmad Khan said that there aren't enough Native Americans in Radnor, or in our area for that matter, to care that we should have to change our name.
More money, more problems.